Thank you. All right, we move on to the Setai, HPB file 6647.
Okay, the applicant, this is HPB file number 1324, 2001 Collins Avenue, the Setai, and the applicant is requesting an after-the-fact certificate of appropriateness, as well as revisions to a previously approved certificate of appropriateness for the demolition of an existing 7-story hotel in order to substantially demolish it and reconstruct the hotel structure. This project was originally approved by the Joint Design Review Historic Preservation Board on October 10th of 1995. A building permit for the project has been issued and construction has commenced. As the board is aware, an emergency demolition order has been issued for the removal of the 7-story Setai building on site. In light of the significant structural issues associated with the building, the applicant is now coming before the board for a certificate of appropriateness to reconstruct the building in its entirety based upon historic documentation, existing condition drawings, as well as molds taken from existing features in the building and the retention of a number of portions of the existing building. Staff has recommended that the application be approved, subject to the conditions enumerated in the staff report.
Thank you, Tom. Applicant.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Again, my name is Lucia Doherty with offices at 1221 Brickell Avenue. Here today on behalf of the owner as well as the applicant, and joining me this morning is Jonathan Breen, who is a principal in the project, as well as Dan Kofsky, who's the project representative who you met the last time. Since that time, there has been an emergency demolition order issued for this property. And notwithstanding that, as I said to you the last time, we have every financial incentive to try to renovate this building and to save it. That not only is there a $10 million tax credit issue, but there is also another $5 million that was not anticipated before in ad valorem tax savings if we can save this building. So since that period of time, the building has not been demolished. We have done everything that we possibly could do to try to save this building. In addition to saving ourselves $15 million, we could also make ourselves heroes, not only in your eyes, but the city's eyes and the historic preservation community. So what we've offered the building official is, what if we just take down the east facade? What if we only pin the west facade and just keep that up? What if we kept 20 to 30 feet in height and just took the rest of that off? And what if we hired another engineer who could, basically come up with a different solution? The building official, and I don't mean just one of them, but all three of them said, listen, you can come up with 15 different engineers. We're engineers. We are independent engineers, and we are telling you that there is no safe way to preserve the building under any of these conditions. And furthermore, even if you did save the facade and pinned it to the building, you can't guarantee us that that facade's going to stay there and not fall down into the street and hurt somebody. So notwithstanding our efforts to try to rethink this issue, to hire another engineer, to do everything we can to try to save this building, we cannot convince the building official that this is something that can be done. Having said that, one of the suggestions made by Beth Dunlap at the last meeting is that we hire ourselves a historic preservation architect to review the process of restoration, because that's the direction you all gave us. And she felt more comfortable, as she suggested, that the board would feel more comfortable if we had an architect that would supervise the replication of the building and the preservation as much as we can of the significant features. We did hire Alan Schulman, who is with us today. He's done a historic analysis of the building and is ready to make a presentation to you.
Thank you, Lucia.
Thanks, Lucia. Alan Schulman, architect, and I actually didn't do a historic analysis. This was, we've just been hired, and we have been working with Dan Kofsky, with the Setai management, et cetera, to kind of quickly come up to speed on what's happening out there and what the plan is here. And we've prepared a report, which I'd like to hand out. And the purpose of this report was just to, as a start, to get everybody on the same page as to the different detail conditions that that we're looking at, that the building comprises, and that we need to reconstruct. I would add, just in the context of this morning, that this is a very different building than, for instance, 2200 Collins Avenue. This is a building with a lot of detail, and a lot of it is cast detail, and a lot of it is, would be, let's say, impossible to replicate were it not for the ability to either cut it down and reinstall it, or to mold it and to recreate it. And what we're proposing to do is both. We're trying to cut down the areas of most elaborate detail, which are the cornices on the north and west facades, and to bring them down to ground level, to store them and to reinstall them at the top. In any case, we've also taken molds of those. Molds have already been taken of those cornices, and over the last week or so, molds have been taken of almost every other condition on the building. And this report documents numerically the different conditions that we have, all the different detail conditions that we have. And in the first part of the report, you can see those enumerated on a facade drawing. In the second part of the report, you can see that we've pulled together two sources here. One are the drawings that were prepared by Jaime Shapiro's office, which are just kind of highlighted at the bottom of each of these detail sheets. And the second, or at the top of each of these sheets, is photographs that were taken by Terry D'Amico several years ago, documenting the building as part of the process of receiving the original certificate of appropriateness. So those show the details, and those are important because a lot of those, let's say the building doesn't look the same today, and this really shows exactly how everything was before this whole project started. So basically, this is just an accounting. This report is basically just an accounting of these different conditions, so you can see what's there. And you'll see that the drawings are much less elaborate than the photographs. For each of these conditions, a mold has been taken. And I believe and in the back of this report, you'll see a specification by M. Ecker and Company, which details how the molds are being proposed here, how the molds are created, and the two different condition of molds, latex and urethane rubber molds. And then just behind that in this report, you can see photographs of the existing building, of the existing structure. There's an example here. We have brought some examples of these molds. And actually, we've done a casting out of one of these molds, so you can see what they look like. And I don't know, maybe we can just pass this around. It's a little oily, but
So it looks like those things.
we like, here's a casting. I won't pass the casting around, but it's here for you to look at. That's a casting done from one of these molds. And this was done on very short notice, so there might be some small imperfections in here that would also be cleared up in the mold making process. But the molds were done in a process that required first coating the detail with latex, for instance, and then putting a kind of a master mold over that, that will assist in taking the mold off the building. And I believe that is now complete for every detail condition in the building. And we brought just a few of them here. Now, details like this would be recreated from the castings, and these are castings. This was the original on the building is a casting. We're casting from the casting. We've been up there to the parapet. We've seen how the stucco meets the casting.
Piece of the building?
No, this is a casting from one of these molds.
Okay.
That was just made, I think, just this morning. It probably hasn't even set, right? Still great. Yeah, it's still, yeah. Then there's a couple of conditions on the building. For instance, if you look at detail 22 and 23, or 24, which are, those are stucco cuttings. That's just cut stucco, basically. We would be recreating that as cut stucco as well, but we've taken a casting of it just so that we can be sure to know exactly what the dimensions and proportions and everything are, so that we know that it can be done right. So just to reiterate, stucco castings and stucco and cut stucco would be used to replicate all the detail in the building. And having seen this, having seen the casting process, I'm confident that we can recreate these things faithfully. You know, it's a pretty detailed building, and I say that with some trepidation because there's, let's say, a lot here that, you know, has to go on. In addition, we need to make some detailed drawings showing exactly how the setbacks work between various stucco planes and how all these things relate to one another. But that's just sort of an accounting of where we're at this point.
All right. Thank you, Alan. Does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, it does.
Lucia?
In conclusion, what we're seeking for you to do today is to approve a certificate of appropriateness for a new building that is a replication of the existing building under the direction of Alan Schulman as the historic preservation architect.
All right, thank you. All right, we'll take some public comment, if there is any, regarding the Dempsey Vanderbilt Sassone structure. Without any, we'll defer to the board. Is there any board comment? I actually have a question to staff. Tom, at the emergency hearing a short time ago, we discussed the removing of the floor plates and its approval, which was done administratively. You had stated that the developer came to staff and requested the removal of these floor plates due to the fact that they didn't feel the existing floor plates would accommodate the loads or weight of the intended uses or new materials that would be incorporated into the building. Can you tell us a little more about that? Like what those weights were?
From an engineering standpoint, no. I'd have to let the developer answer that with regard to why the existing floor plates weren't going to meet code.
Dan, do you have any comment? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Dan Kofsky for Setai Owners, LLC. Specifically, the building doesn't meet current code. It was built in 1936, and the new design required. The current code has much different live loads and dead load requirements on floors and columns. And this building just, from day one, the design was to remove all of the floors and replace them with new concrete slabs.
We say from the beginning this was something that was brought to staff's attention this year,
Right.
correct?
My understanding was that it was earlier, but I couldn't tell you exactly when that happened.
Recreating this, I thought that it was that the prior contractor hadn't planned on it and that this was your firm's.
No,
No,
let me
But
just say
I'm-
something.
I'm-
As I
yeah, there's
recall,
been a
because I
lot
was
said,
involved in
and
that.
it's hard to
There are two things. First of all, the floor plates, the columns going through the floor plates don't line up.
Right.
They're eccentric.
I don't know.
They're eccentric. They move within the
Yeah.
floors.
Plus,
That's number one. Number two, the contractor that was there said that he would not bring his crew in there to build a building with those floor plates from the top down or bottom up, either one.
Either scheme.
apparently
So-
there's also a few different forms of construction that were utilized in the building of these particular floor plates, according to, I believe it was Mohammed, at our first discussion of this in recent months. All right, so basically what you're suggesting is the existing floor plates, if the building could have been saved, would not accommodate the anticipated weight of the finishes or what?
No, just current code. It's strictly updating the building to a current code, and that was derived by Raul Puig, who's the structural engineer of record, and then...
Okay, in other words, because this building had lost its CO due to it not being occupied, it needed to be brought up to current code.
No, it was, again, back to the design criteria by the structural engineer of record. We were going to replace the floors with new floors.
Yeah, but that runs contrary to the order, or the former order of this board in regard to the building being fully restored.
Well, the floor
All right.
plates are still there. I mean, floor plates haven't gone, they're still there. The
Yeah.
point is, there's nobody who can renovate this building using those floor plates.
Okay. Tom, in terms of this sort of approval being done administratively, has anything like this been approved in the past, meaning
If there's a structural issue with regard to floor plates, and the floor plates are being replaced exactly where they were before, same height and everything, we have done that before administratively.
you have done that before? Okay, because that sort of circumvented the will of the former order in terms of staff approving it administratively. It sort of figuratively tied our hands together, or wrists together, in terms of what can be put there now that the facade needs to come down. How? Because we're limited to a replication of the existing facade or a new facade to accommodate these 8 stories.
How are you limited to a new facade?
How? Today, we're just approving the facade. We're not approving the floor plates. You guys
No,
approve the
you're
floor plates.
approving everything. You're approving basically a reconstruction of the building.
Replication.
That's not what I heard at our emergency meeting from Gary.
But we're approving it, doing it according to current code.
Well, yeah, but you're approving
Right.
essentially a brand-new structure.
Exactly. So the floor plates would be according to
Yeah.
current code, not 1920.
All right.
But in the same location as they always were.
All right. Gary, I alluded to you at our emergency meeting not too long ago. You stated that this meeting would be to decide the facade of the building, whether it would be a replicated facade or a new facade.
Yes.
The floor plates would not be within the purview of this board to consider because it had previously been approved or approved by staff, which...
Right. Well, my understanding of the existing status of the building and the construction plan was that there was going to be a new building constructed inside the exterior facade of the old building. So to the extent that they already had permits to do that, that's really not affected by either the demolition order or their request to replace what is being demolished, which the new demolition order would only be really going to the exterior facade because they already had the right to demolish everything else in the interior.
So we're not discussing anything on the interior today, per se.
In my mind, no.
All right. Tom, do you understand where the dilemma lies in that you guys approving it administratively, we have no other alternative than to approve the replication of the facade or a new facade, nothing else?
No. I mean, if you didn't want to approve the replication of the building, nothing's binding you to do that.
Okay. Do you agree with that, Gary?
Well, in my mind, The limitation of your discretion on whether to not approve replication or not is that the new facade would be something other than replication. But as far as the interior of the building, they already have permits and the right to move forward on that. So
I'm hearing two different things from both you two. But, all right. I'll defer to the board. Is there any comment? Judith, you have your mouth full.
Are we ready for a motion to approve it, or are we still discussing it?
Whatever our pleasure is.
Well, I would like to start a motion to approve it.
All right, there's a motion to approve it from Judith. Is there a second? Okay.
You know, I'd first like to say that, on the earlier project, I said I take these on a case-by-case basis. And this one, on a case-by-case basis, I'm still really struggling with. I'm not convinced that this building had to meet the fate that it is going to meet. I think that to a large extent, what's happening has been aggravated by the fact that it was left open for as many years as it was left open, and it was many years. And so that's a problem to me. The testimony of all the engineers indicate that it has to come down, and so I'm reluctantly going to agree to that. But I would just ask everybody involved in this entire process, let's fight not to let this happen again. Let's not allow these buildings to remain open and exposed to the elements as much as this one has. It just can't be permitted in the future. So with that said, I guess I do second the motion.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Is there any more discussion? Well, I'd like to say I'm very upset with the 4 or so hours of testimony that we've heard in the past 60 days or so. A lot of it is conflicting, contrary from all the parties involved. And I find it very disturbing. First we hear the bracing was just removed and it was sent back. Then we hear it wasn't sent back. We hear the building wasn't secured years ago to allow a certain pressurization to occur. And then we hear that it should have been secured if whether or not the building left open had accelerated the rate of deterioration. I heard from an important party that not much. That leaves a lot of doubt in my mind. I'm very troubled by this, and I'm not going to vote in support of it. And having said that...
I want to add that I made the motion because of the place that we're at now. I didn't want it to seem that I was happy about it. I think in the future, when we have a kind of a quid pro quo, that if we let you build a tower, or anybody build a tower because they're restoring a historic building, that the historic building ought to be done first before the tower goes up. But at this point, the only alternative I see is to allow the historic preservation, the historic replication to go forward.
I see more than that. I see room for compromise here, but that's just my vision.
Can I ask a question? Is one thing that has occurred to me and troubles me is that the possibility that this would not then be put back into use as a hotel. And is there can we stipulate that the building may not be converted into condominium?
I'll stipulate that because that's part of our condo docs. We are required to provide a hotel for those residents in the Setai residence.
Okay.
And I'll stipulate that and make a condition.
I feel totally torn by this. The whole thing has been heart-wrenching, and I want to renew my request that we ask the city commission or the city manager to, as quickly as possible, appoint an independent engineering consultant with expertise in the structural preservation of historic buildings, even if that person has to be found nationally or internationally. But I grapple with it, you know, the questions of reconstruction and not reconstruction. In this case, I think that I ultimately will fall down on the side of the reconstruction because it's so important to the street. But I too am really troubled by anything where a new building, and this one, I'm not if that new tower were someplace else, I would like it a lot, but I think it's way too tall, and I'm really sorry that we ever had zoning that allowed it, because I think it's just too tall for the neighborhood, and troubles me, although it's beautifully designed. You know, it would be more beautiful to look at someplace where there were other 38 or 40-story buildings. So, and I'm actually unclear as to how much FAR was derived from the restoration of the Dempsey Vanderbilt. I've asked that, but I don't know.
There wasn't any. I
What?
mean, at the time.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't ever, I don't know what the FAR that was derived was, but, and I think, again, we have to strive as a city in the future to do everything we can not to put our historic buildings in any sort of jeopardy.
All right, thank you, Beth. Randall, do you?
I have a question, and maybe Alan is the person that can answer this. I don't know. Why would a building be built with eccentric columns? And was this something that occurs in other buildings from the period?
It happens very rarely. It's obviously structurally very inefficient. Probably it had to do with changing floor plans on different floors. Maybe floors 2 through whatever had bigger rooms, or had some rooms were larger in certain places, and they had to move things to get room configurations to change. That would be my best guess, but it's rare.
Would that ever pass muster? I mean, it just seems completely.
Well,
it seems like bad construction. I mean, Bill. I mean, how could that happen?
If it's properly engineered, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. There is must have been some rationale for these plan changes, as Alan says.
I'll tell you where it happens all the time. Yeah. In modern construction would be between where a building sits on a parking garage, and the building layout is very different than the layout of the garage. So you have to transfer. You know, you have to have transfer beams to kind of get those lines of columns that are coming down through the apartments to then be redistributed through the parking layout. That's like very typical. I don't know. Yeah, but
These are just straight columns going 8 stories up, and they don't align.
Yeah. And who knows why.
So that condition is not an example or indicates shoddy construction.
No, I think in general, it seems that most buildings on the beach were very simple, constructed in simple ways that didn't allow for that type of costly, because it is more costly to transfer, structure. You probably have to have a deeper beam with more reinforcing in it to take the eccentricities. And most beach structures don't have that sort of sophistication. They just, structures just come down straight in lines. I don't know why this one did. I mean, this was a more elegant hotel. Maybe they had a higher budget and they could afford, maybe they had more varied room types. I'm not really sure.
So there's nothing wrong with the way the columns are laid out?
No, I mean, nothing inherently wrong. I mean, eccentricities happen in structure. As long as the engineer designs for it correctly, it's okay.
Did the engineer design for it correctly?
That I couldn't answer. I'm not even,
maybe they made a mistake.
I'm not familiar
But
enough with those
But
conditions.
isn't it that it poses a problem now because they could not repair it easily by just laying a column up? The original building might not have been a problem. Isn't what you're saying, though, that the original building might not have been a problem the way it was designed, but that now, if somebody tried to repair the bad columns, that it becomes a problem that it's not.
I'm going to venture,
Continuous.
I'm not entirely, because I'm not that familiar with this issue, I just came aboard, but probably that's just another those eccentricities are just another factor that accelerated the deterioration of, when the deterioration started, the fact that there's eccentricities make for higher stresses, and let's say some spalling starts, and the reinforcing is weakened, it just kind of quickens the degradation. That would be that would be my guess of what's happened here in this particular case.
All right.
By the way, I would say, just in relationship to the discussion that you're having about how to prevent these things from happening, one of the systemic issues that we deal with as architects is that the bar structurally is set very high. That's what life safety is about in the year 2002, is that the buildings have to withstand a lot of forces, and that's something to look at. That would be something to look at, I think, also, if you were to have, let's say, if you were to have an engineer or hire a city engineer to discuss these issues, would be, should the bar be so high in a restoration project, structurally?
Do you believe the unsecuring of these windows contributed to the deterioration of the structure?
I just know this project for 3 or 4 days, so I'm not really. I
Okay.
can't really
I didn't
say with a lot of authority what's happened. I don't even know how long it's been open, but yeah, when buildings are open to the elements, it accelerates the deterioration. Absolutely.
All right. There's a motion and a second in support of.
Can I just make two clarifications? This motion will include the condition that the restored and reconstructed building will only be used for hotels. And also with condition number 4, I'd like to add that the historic analysis will also be approved by staff, boxed and stored prior to the issuance of a building permit, like on the last one, so that it's actually completed before a building permit's issued.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Tom, I do.
Who was
have
the second? I'm sorry.
well,
Bill Taylor was the second. Okay.
I have a question before we vote on this regarding the concurrency determination. It was determined that this project would not meet concurrency requirements, and that a payment of mitigation fees and entering with the developer and the city into an agreement needs to occur. When?
Well,
Can you tell us what this means?
The project, as it was originally approved, did not meet concurrency, and the applicant had to pay a parking impact fee. And so I believe that since they're not proposing to adjust the FAR, that same parking impact fee or concurrency mitigation fee will carry over to the to this reconstruction. So I don't believe that there is going to be a concurrency issue, but at the time of building permit, we'll just need the concurrency manager to confirm that.
All right. So in other words, the pedestal that they're constructing will accommodate, Tom?
I'm sorry, what?
The parking requirement has been met with the pedestal, or?
It's big enough, I hope so.
Yeah, it's 10 stories. Good afternoon, George. How are you?
Good afternoon. My recollection was that, and as you recall, there's a provision in the ordinance with respect to required parking that in a historic district, contributing buildings don't have a parking requirement for any use that's inside the building.
Yeah.
Obviously, now that we are unfortunately going to lose the Vanderbilt, that new building will have a parking requirement that was not calculated at the time of the original building permit, and they'll have to satisfy that through the payment of a parking impact fee. That's just the required parking issue. The issue of concurrency, though, regardless of whether or not it was within the rehab building or a reconstructed building, that concurrency determination was made for the amount of trips that was being generated by the use that was in the proposed building. So that, Tom, is correct. That would not change. And to the extent that there was some mitigation fees or participation in some program that addressed the capacity issues that were being generated or being caused to be deficient by the project, that would all continue, and that should not change.
Okay, so in other words, what you're saying, another fee has been attached to
There are
this project?
right.
Parking impact fee?
And as I recall, there were also 30 or maybe even 60 spaces actually on the footprint of that building that were
To the rear?
contemplated. Right, to the rear, or maybe the north.
So that'll
north.
mitigate those
Well, they'll have to,
impact
obviously,
fee costs?
they'll be recreating that parking space as well, and that was part of so that's not going away. There is some parking that is being created in the building, but again, that was to take care of the parking requirement for the entire project. Now there's this additional parking requirement that is caused by the
Yeah.
construction issue, but they can pay a parking impact fee for that, a fee
Yeah.
in lieu of providing parking.
Now, I guess it was last month, and not to divert too far from what we're discussing, the Setai, we were talking about, what was it, the 334 Euclid, and you had a concern that just saving a small portion of the facade should not necessarily allow somebody to retain their development rights or
Correct.
or parking impact fee requirements.
And in this case, I don't believe there's sufficient structure being saved
Yeah.
to give them that credit that the code has in place with respect to require parking, so that's why they'll have to pay the parking impact.
And the same goes for 2200, which was approved today to be reconstructed.
Correct. They'll have to deal with the parking issue. That provision that says an existing building doesn't have a parking requirement for any use inside of it goes away, and they'll have to satisfy that by payment
Yeah.
of a fee in lieu of providing the.
And how's that fee determined? I know in units or apartment units, it's $15,000.
It's depending on the use. There's a parking requirement. Residential units have 1.5 parking spaces per unit. Retail generally has 300 square feet per, one space for 300 square feet. And it varies. Restaurants is 1 parking space per 4 seats. So depending on the use, there's a calculation that's made. And the fee right now is $15,000 per space that is not provided.
So in terms of the Setai, what type of fee are we talking about? Or
It would depend on the number of hotel rooms that will be in that portion of the building and the other accessory uses that may also occur on the ground floor.
now, in terms of hotel uses, what formula is used?
That's 1 space per unit.
All right. How many units do you have going in there? 70?
87.
Ouch to a little guy like me.
Ouch to us, too.
Now, in fairness to them in terms of the calculation, because it's been ruled that they are a vested project back to at the time that they pulled the building permit, I believe that the parking impact fees at the time were actually $5,000. And we're exploring to see if it's equitable actually to then, if they had come in back in 97 or whenever the approval was, and actually gotten the approval to be the reconstruction of that building at that time, then they would have been charged the $5,000, not the $15,000 that it was changed to in 98.
But what's odd is they've managed to preserve their development rights. And
Right, and I think that as a policy question, I don't know whether you'll discuss this at a later
Yeah.
time or not, I think that one of the issues that we need to address when you give an approval for any kind of remodeling, rehabilitation, or reconstruction is that the issues of the historic structure are somehow programmed or phased in, that they occur at the beginning end of the project and not at the tail end of the project.
Exactly, like the restoration, for example.
Right. So, we would have had perhaps a whole different issue before us if the tower had not been constructed already and we were dealing whether or not the building stays or not. And there would have been different implications at that time, perhaps, in terms of what was vested and what was not vested.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, George. All right. There is a motion and a second. Tom, you want to take a roll call?
Okay. Mr. Taylor? Mr. Garcia? Ms. Burson?
Yes?
Ms. Dunlop? Mr. Novick?
No.
And Mr. Robinson? Motion is approved 5-1.
Thank you very
Right.
much.
Thank you. All right, we move on to the James Hotel,
Oh, I didn't know.
1745 James Avenue.
Okay. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, while we're setting up for this, you see me in and out of the chambers all morning.
All right, William? I thought
Pardon?
you were going to the bathroom. You all right?
No, it wasn't going to the bathroom. We're dealing with a brand-new emergency demolition order, which is just about to be issued on another building. I just heard about it last night. We had our first major meeting this morning, and I've just gone back to another meeting.
All right,
We have an item on the agenda under new business, an HP discussion, demolition of small buildings in historic districts. I would like to include this building in that discussion because it's something we believe that the building can continue to be preserved
all right.
if we perform certain work.
We have two of those today, William. There was a demolition order issued last week regarding a property on Ocean Drive that I suppose we can discuss at the same time.
There will be two.
All right.
And the situation, the condition is almost identical in each of them. It's 826 Collins Avenue, the Bendel, which is a 1920s apartment building.
Surprise. I am shocked that the Bendel is structurally unsound after it's been open for how long? Oh, my God.
You know, that is a critical building in
All I'm
terms of
doing,
it.
I'm letting you know, if you would
Okay.
not like to put the item on the agenda, a demolition order will be
All right.
issued before the end of the week.
I just want to state that every building.
We're trying to work with you, bring it to
I
your
hear you.
attention as immediately as we
All
know
right.
about
I
it.
just want to make a point that every building on that street, the 8th Street block of Collins Avenue on the west side, is a period building. That would certainly be a knocked-out tooth if and it should go. In other words, all the buildings there from the 20s and 30s and early 40s.
Clearly, that is why
Yeah.
we are acting immediately to be able to proceed with the restoration of the building, rather than finding that we're going to lose it.
So the demolition order was issued because the
No,
structural
the
engineer?
demolition order is about to be issued.
Okay, due to
We've
the
been
fact
meeting-
that
We've been meeting with the engineers and the owners of the project all morning
All right.
to try to find a solution whereby the building official would be able to approve the continuation of the restoration if certain measures are taken right now.
Now, what comes to mind, this is also a Les Bellinson project, similar to the other demolition order that was issued.
This has nothing to do with architects.
Yeah,
This has to
but
do with
could
the
it-
condition
Could
of
it be a
buildings that age
loophole
with
that the
time.
development community has found and is using it to demolish their buildings? It's a
You
yes
know,
or no
to me,
question.
that is such an irrelevant issue, especially in this form. We're dealing with real buildings with real issues. We have an emergency situation that needs
All
to
right,
be addressed.
All right, William, we'll discuss it
I
later.
mean, personal opinions on whether that's for another meeting if the board chooses to discuss those
We'll
issues.
discuss it in a little while, I suppose.
Fine, okay.
All right.
So the item will be on the agenda this afternoon as a
Okay.
part of the discussion of small buildings in historic districts.
Okay, this is HP file number 1251, 1745 James Avenue.